Hi, everybody. I'm an integrative lawyer. Now, how many of you cringed when I said the word lawyer? Did you think I was going to come out here and tell you about somebody I've destroyed or dominated? Calling a lawyer is what you do when enlightenment fails, right? You want to beat somebody up? Well, not exactly. We're going to talk about that. Most of you are not lawyers, and you're wondering, what has this got to do with me? Why is this lawyer talking to me? But consider, law is the DNA of society. It's the thread that runs through our lives and communities. It's how we have a structure for designing, maintaining, repairing, and healing our relationships. Law sets the rules for how we live together. It tells you who you can marry, when you're not married anymore, that red light is a place to stop, and that when you break an agreement, sometimes it has consequences. It reflects the values of society and defines our rights and responsibilities. And if that doesn't convince you that law matters, more than half our politicians are lawyers. So I'm a different kind of lawyer. I want to tell you about a movement in law that is more conscious and compassionate, but first you're going to get a bit of my story. I went to law school to be a change agent. I was 29 years old. I was raising a passel of children in a blended family. I was politically active, and law school looked like a place where I could go to get the tools and the power to make a difference. But then, especially after law school, I almost didn't become a lawyer at all. I had a lot of evidence that lawyers were jerks. And if you've spent any time in the courthouse, you'll understand that. I thought that lawyers were just unhappy, argumentative, they spread misery. And it's true, there are statistics that show that lawyers have very high rates of suicide, stress, and addiction, and the typical lawyer lifestyle is not very sustainable. So I went ahead and I graduated, and just to show that I could, I passed 2 bar exams. And then I put my law degree and my bar membership in a closet, and I ignored them for a few years. Instead, I worked for nonprofits. I immersed myself in personal development work. I was all about interconnectedness. I was going to be Miss Peace, Love, and Understanding, trying to do some good in the world. If anybody asked about my law degree, I was really happy to tell them how horrible lawyers were, and how the legal system was broken. I complained a lot, and I figured that I couldn't make a difference, so I might as well go away and do something else. But a few years went by, and I was in one of those personal development seminars, and a man stood up. And he said his name was Forrest Baird, and Forrest said that he was a lawyer, and he focused on granting dignity to everyone in the process. And as a divorce lawyer, it was his goal that at the end of every divorce, his client and the ex were able to be friends and raise their children together. He also talked about how his personal transformation was the foundation of his law practice. Well, you know those movies where everything goes from black and white to color, and the birds fly and sing, and everything is a bright and beautiful place? That was that moment for me. I realized that I could be that kind of lawyer. I could be a lawyer who was a peacemaker and a healer. So I wanted to do that. A few months later, I opened my own law practice. I was in a small town in North Carolina, and I still didn't quite know how to do it, so I started doing what I thought lawyers do. I started going to court. I was immersed in trials, and so I was trying to grant dignity, and I was trying to help my clients be friends with their exes. I was kind of muddling through, but it wasn't easy. Now, I must say, trial was kind of a fun game because I mostly won, and I enjoyed matching wits and coming up with creative strategies. But from the client perspective, it wasn't so fun. It really hurt my clients, it hurt their children. It didn't resolve anything. In fact, it usually made it worse. I had repeat clients who kept coming back because it just kept escalating. So even winning was an awful experience for my clients. One day a client came to me and she said, if I ever have to go back to court, I'm going to give him my children. And she meant it. It was just awful, even though she won. So at that point, I might have quit. But I'd met Forrest, so I knew there was something else possible. I just had to find the way for me to do it. So I called Forrest for help, and I even went to Chicago to see him. And he told me a lot of things. It was the mid-1990s at that point, and there were a lot of new ideas emerging. I met a man called Stu Webb, who was inventing something called collaborative law. Now, in collaborative law, the divorcing couple, the husband and wife, and their 2 lawyers actually sign an agreement saying they're not going to court. They're going to resolve it as a family, moving forward with 2 houses instead of 1. And so they take a problem-solving approach. At that time, there was this new thing out called mediation. And I found out about that, where that involves a neutral facilitator who sits with people, listens, helps them talk through, and come up with an agreement. Now, those were really interesting. But law school had taught me how to fight. It hadn't taught me how to make peace. And all my personal transformation work had been about looking inward. So how could I be a peacemaker and still be a lawyer? So I went through a lot of trial and error. Some of the things I tried worked, some didn't. Started calling myself a lawyer peacemaker, and I reclaimed counselor at law as my title. I hired a social worker and a counselor to come in and work with my clients on their emotional issues, and I went to court less and less until I didn't go to court at all. I even feng shuied my office. I was the weirdest lawyer in my town, and probably a lot of other towns too. One day I went to a bar association meeting. It was one of those all-day meetings, and we sat in groups of 8 at lunch, and we were told to introduce ourselves. So I introduced myself as a lawyer who was working on peacemaking and healing. 7 people suddenly saw someone across the room, and they left me sitting there by myself. So I knew that I needed to find my tribe. I needed to find some allies, because this was not something I was going to be able to do alone. A colleague told me about an organization called the International Alliance of Holistic Lawyers, IAHL for short, and I decided to go to their next conference. Now, I'd been doing a lot of cool stuff. I thought I was really cutting edge, and I was going to show them how it was done at the IAHL conference. And I'd be really impressive. And what I really found out was how conventional I was. They were a pretty diverse group of lawyers in that sense of they were law professors who were innovative. There were collaborative lawyers there. There were energy healers. There was one lawyer who was using yoga to resolve conflict with his clients in his office. They meditated together. They sang and they held hands. It was 1999. I was from a small town in North Carolina, and at that point my life was pretty narrow and they were pretty weird. But there was something about them. They were so outside the box that they'd really entered a new paradigm. They were happy and they were self-expressed and full of possibility. I wanted what they had, so I joined the organization. Being in community gives us courage. So after I met them, I got really bolder. I became a collaborative lawyer, I became a mediator. My divorce clients did become friends. I learned a lot about restorative justice. And I was lucky enough to be able to work on some cases where I helped the families of murder victims prepare to meet the person who had killed their loved one. And I worked with the one who had killed that loved one to help them learn how to communicate their remorse and apologize, and to bring those people face to face. I loved my law practice and my clients. I became the hugging lawyer. It was transformational healing work. I facilitated some of life's most intimate moments. I created and dissolved, or helped create and dissolve, important relationships. I held a lot of hands. I listened to a lot of heartbreak. I celebrated milestones. The skills that I'd learned in my personal transformation work were put to work in my law practice, helping clients do their own transformational work. So as I continued to stretch myself, and I sometimes say that I haven't seen my comfort zone in a long time, I began to consider a bigger role for me. Could I go from small-town lawyer to a leader in the broader world? So I thought about what Forrest had done for me. I thought about how I'd gained courage from knowing that I wasn't alone anymore. And I sensed there were a lot of others out there. I kept running into people and hearing from people, and I knew that there was a need for support and community. So I decided that my mission was going to be to seek out those lawyers who were bringing peacemaking and healing to law, and to support them and nurture the development of a new legal system. In 2008, I gave up my house and my office, and I became a nomad to travel the world in support of my mission. I began by videotaping lawyers for my website, Cutting Edge Law. And after I had some videos up, the ABA editor called me up and said, "Wow, we knew law was moving in this direction, but we didn't know there were this many people. Would you be willing to write a book?" Well, of course I said yes. The ABA has about 400,000 lawyer members. It's one of, if not the largest mainstream legal organization in the world. So I wrote the book, and it was called Lawyers as Peacemakers, and it was an immediate bestseller. So then I realized, we aren't weird lawyers, we're pioneers. And the book opened a lot of doors for me. I was able to speak to law schools and law societies and bar associations around the world. So these days, I kind of style myself as a coach, trainer, and author. But what I really am is a connector of lawyers. I've been around the world several times. Usually I go twice a year, all the way around. And I've learned that evolution is happening everywhere. I encounter a lot of lawyers. Every day, a new email, Skype, several times a week. Synchronistically, I'll sit next to somebody on an airplane, and it'll be a lawyer. And lawyers come up to me, and they say, "Thought I was alone." And I bring them into the fold. Now, there are thousands of us, and we call ourselves Integrative Lawyers. And I am one of the global leaders in this Integrative Law movement to transform law. And the ABA asked me to write a second book, which will be out any day. Now, if you're looking for an integrative lawyer, you might have to ask around to find one, because we're not as visible as the lawyers you see in courtroom dramas. There's still a lot of lawyers who are in traditional practices thinking that being a jerk is the way to go and wanting more in their lives. But change is happening. There's a new consciousness that's emerging in the world, and lawyers are part of it. So, for example, there's a lot of mindfulness training going on in law schools. Most law schools and a lot of bar associations have a mindfulness program. Now, we say it's for stress, but it's a start. Lawyers are learning neuroscience, emotional intelligence, compassion, and empathy, and we're stepping out of the old paradigm. Collaborative law is now multidisciplinary. It's called collaborative practice. You may know about mediation and restorative justice in your own community. Other models that you may not have heard of that are growing include conscious contracts for businesses, earth jurisprudence that reflects that we are all interconnected with Mother Earth, and nature has rights. There's sharing law for the sharing economy. Drug treatment courts focus on helping people get off drugs rather than sending them to prison. And there's a project for integrating spirituality, law, and politics. We share values like compassion, interconnectedness, peace, and love. And yes, sometimes we use the L word. I travel around the world. I tell the stories of lawyers who are transforming ourselves and incorporating our transformation in the legal profession. We're creating a new legal system for a new, more integrative, conscious society. There are over 1 million lawyers in the US, twice that internationally. What if all lawyers were peacemakers, problem solvers, and healers of conflicts? What if we were all change makers? Thank you.